This right here is a 35mm prime lens from LUMIX, while this is a 35mm Cine lens from 7 Artisan. And in this video, I'm going to be comparing these two lenses to tell you why you might want to buy a prime lens and why you might want to buy a Cine lens for your L mount full frame camera. Now, the first thing we need to talk about between these two lenses is gonna be the price. Now, the 7 Artisan full frame L mount lens is gonna be coming around $419, while the prime lens 35mm lens from LUMIX is gonna be coming around $697, basically $700. Now, while the Cine lens is reading in a T2.0, basically T-stops, which is more accurate in reading lights, and the prime lens is reading in f-stops at an f1.8, they're pretty much almost equivalent, because the equivalence in T-stops to f-stops, basically it's a f1.9 and an equivalent in f-stops to T-stops. So they're extremely close in the aperture. Now, getting into the physical build between these two lenses, the prime lens is going to be a lot lighter, coming in around 0.65 pounds or basically 295 grams, being in an entire plastic body around this entire lens, while the Cine lens is going to be coming a lot heavier at 1.5 pounds or basically 674.5 grams. Now, if weight is a huge thing you need to consider, the Cine lens is almost weighing an entire pound more than the prime lens. And that's just because it's an entire metal body versus a plastic body. Now, with all that said, that means that this lens is definitely going to be a lot more durable because it's a metal body and you don't have to worry about it breaking as much in comparison to the plastic body. Now, for the filter threads on both these lenses, the prime lens is coming in at 67mm as a filter thread, while the Cine lens is an 82mm filter thread. Now, for advantages of the filter thread, I actually prefer having a bigger filter thread, especially because I have other lenses in my kit that require a bigger filter thread. I personally recommend having the biggest filter that fits on your biggest filter lens and then just using step-up rings to adapt your other lenses to it. Now, on the Cine lens, it does have gear teeth all around it. It does have a 270-degree focus pull on this entire lens, so it does take a second to go from infinity to the closest focal distance. And since you're already watching this video, you probably already know Cine lenses don't have autofocus. But that begs the question, can you use a prime lens to pull focus? Sort of. When you're using a prime lens and you switch it into manual focus, the linear focus system is telling the camera, I'm trying to change my focus instead of physically moving the glass like a cinema lens does. So as you pull focus, it's telling the camera, hey, I'm pulling focus, and it's not as accurate as a cinema lens may be. For example, if you're using a follow focus system and you have an A and B stop, it might not be as smooth as a cinema lens may be. The glass itself will be physically moving in the cinema lens, giving you a more accurate focus pull than using a prime lens and just turning on to manual focus. Now, in my last review that I just did of the 35mm Cine lens of the entire lens itself, the biggest issue I saw in it was the focus breathing that the Cine lens had. Now, here is an example showing the focus breathing on the 7 Artisan lens versus showing the focus breathing on the prime lens from LUMIX. Now, something you could tell on the 7 Artisan lens when it's pulling focus to infinity to really close is that the field of view itself is changing when the focus distance is changing itself. Now, this isn't a huge issue with either of these lenses if you're pulling focus just a little bit back and forth. But when you start pinning stuff really close to the camera and then pin it all the way back, the focus distance and field of view itself will slowly shift back and forth. And the last thing I want to touch point on today in this video is going to be the characteristics of these lenses. Now, a prime lens I feel like gives you a more neutral and natural looking image. So if you want something to be as close as possible to reality or to just life in general, that's what a prime lens is going to give you. Meanwhile, a cinema lens like the 7 Artisans is going to give you a lot more characteristics in the image itself. Now, while the bokeh on both of these lenses look really clean and they're super soft, the 7 Artisans lens is going to be a lot softer and give it a lot more characteristics to the final image itself. So that could be either a pro if you want those characteristics or a con if you want a more neutral, natural looking lens. And then the last thing to note, when I've been doing my testing, something I noticed is that the 7 Artisan's lens has a color shift to warm and green tones, which this could be easily corrected internally in your camera before you start recording or in post later on. Now finally, who would I recommend the prime lens versus the cinema lens? The first one, let's start with the prime lens. So if you need autofocus at all, or you need a lightweight lens, or you need a lens that is just looking super neutral and just super natural and really close to reality, then the prime lens is probably the way to go. This lens is just an extremely fast autofocus working system, especially paired with the S5 II or 2X, and it's an incredible, affordable prime lens. Meanwhile, for cinema lenses, if you're looking for a lens that's a lot softer, a lot more characteristics, and has a lot more professionalism when you're starting to go to sets and just gives a little bit of a higher quality image look, then the cinema lens might be for you. Now, this lens is a lot heavier and it will take a lot more work to get the final image than an autofocus prime lens will do, but it's definitely worth it. And especially for the price, this is one of the best cinema lenses that you can get in this budget for the L mount system. If you're still on the fence if you should buy a 35mm Cine lens versus a 35mm prime lens, I reviewed both of these lenses individually. And you can check out those videos right here and here. Until next week, guys, peace.